So greetings and welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to co-host this roundtable today, and thank you all for joining. This is a roundtable, just checking that my sound is okay. Sorry about that. This is one of the first roundtables in the Future of Work series hosted by reInvent in partnership with Intuit. We've teed up a rockstar group of participants today from the public sector, private sector, and academia to focus on addressing the question, what new policies related to independent workers should we ask innovative mayors to pilot? As most of you know, thanks to new technologies and the so-called digital revolution, every aspect of work is changing. How people work, who can work, what work looks like, and how we think about work, period. From the rise in freelancers, independent workers, the gig economy and on-demand economy, to the as yet unknown impacts of automation and AI, there are big question marks around what this means for income generation, talent mobility, social safety nets, and the labor force as a whole. These challenges and unknowns have massive implications, not least for policymakers. By and large, the rules on the books today are outdated for today's evolving workforce. Yet it's difficult to know what to do, and many policymakers are still unaware of the magnitude of the changes underway. Today, we're going to dive into some of the most salient of these issues with the goals of raising awareness of how the future of work is already playing out and what's on the horizon, inspiring those who run cities, both mayors and their teams, to step up and take the lead on creating a better environment for independent workers, and identifying robust emerging ideas that could be applied to pilot projects at the city level right now. So very briefly, the structure for today is as follows. First, we're going to do a quick round of intros. Then we've broken the discussion into three main parts. First, we're going to talk about cities' point of view. Second, we'll take workers' point of view, independent workers' point of view. And third, we're going to take the insights from those two sections and apply them to look at potential pilots and solutions. Donnie Fowler, who's also on today's call, he and I will share the role of guiding these discussions. So with that, let's get started. And I see that Mayor Tubbs has joined us. Welcome. I think we have everyone is visible now to the audience. And what I'd like to do is now take about 1 minute each, and we're just going to go around and have each of you talk about who you are and what brings you to the table today when we look specifically at the future of work, cities, and policy. So I'm April Rinne. I'm one of the co-moderators. I'm an independent advisor, and I work with a lot of startup companies and policymakers on the new economy and digital economy, and the future of work is a key theme in my portfolio. Donnie, let me pass it over to you.
Hello, I'm Donnie Fowler, and I run Tech for America. Tech for America, T4A.org, is a hub for innovation that connects the best and brightest talent and networks in Silicon Valley with public leaders from around the country to help those leaders tackle the problems they're facing back home. We're delighted to co-moderate and co-host this today with reInvent and with you, April.
Thank you. Do you want to pass the baton?
Mayor Tubbs, welcome. Mayor of Stockton, California.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Michael Tubbs. I'm the mayor of Stockton, California, and I'm really interested in this space because as a mayor, I'm a mayor of a city. And the city has workers, and a lot of workers are already in the gig economy, but some of the policymaking tools and discussions we have seem to be a little bit insufficient. So I'm really looking for how do we position cities like Stockton's, 300,000 people, to really make sure our folks aren't displaced or left behind, but kind of welcome technology innovation and see some of the benefits for the kind of economy of the future.
Excellent, welcome. Todd, over to you.
Hi everyone, Todd Rufo. I lead the Office of Economic and Workforce Development here in San Francisco. The mission of our office and our work is to help San Francisco's economy be strong, but also to ensure that all San Franciscans benefit from a strong economy and that we're attacking income inequality, but also helping all San Franciscans achieve economic self-sufficiency, to be able to stay, grow, and prosper in our city. And this is an important topic for any city, as the mayor said, in particular to ensure not just that we have a really good regulatory framework for this type of work, but also that we're helping to maximize the opportunities of the gig economy to help advance major policy objectives, like helping our residents be successful.
Welcome. Melissa.
So, I'm Melissa Netram. I'm with the Office of Corporate Affairs in Intuit. Intuit's happy to be a sponsor for the Future of Work series that we're having today. For those of you who know Intuit, we are a company that does the best to help create empower prosperity for consumers, small businesses, and self-employed. We've done a lot of work over the past year with the self-employed workers in the on-demand economy, in the sense of trying to see what it is that makes them want to become self-employed, what we see the future holding for them. We anticipate that, by 2020, there'll be 7.7 million people participating in the on-demand economy. And so, being from the policy office of Intuit, I'm here today to help with that perspective.
Excellent. Glad to hear. Thank you and welcome. And finally, Trevor Schultz.
New York. So I'm a scholar and activist. I've been working on the shift of labor markets to the internet since 2008, 2009. Convened yearly conferences on digital work, and have recently in 2014 started a project around bringing the cooperative sector to the internet, so something we call platform cooperatives. So what would an Uber be like that is owned by its workers? What would an Airbnb like that is owned by a city?
Fabulous. Well, welcome again, everyone. I think we do have a really neat, diverse, very experienced group together today. Public sector, private sector, academia, social sector. This is fantastic. Let's go ahead, I think, and dive into discussion. And as was explained, the way that we've teed this up is basically in 3 sections. And this is intended to be very much a live conversation. It can be fluid and we can take tangents, but to really anchor ourselves around taking the perspective of mayors and what cities and city teams need, and also taking the perspective of workers. What do independent workers need today and moving forward, both to start and build and manage a thriving workforce, but also as we think about broader issues of talent mobility, upward mobility, and so forth. So the first section that we wanted to dive into is the mayor and mayor, city government, that lens, that set of shoes and perspective. And with that, Donnie, let me pass it over to you.
Thanks, April. We've always had part-time workers. The guy that comes and knocks on your door and wants to cut your grass, or the part-time tutor for your kid in school. Part-time work itself is not new. What's happening in the larger economy, especially where it's related to technology, is bringing some of these part-time opportunities to bear faster. So for example, technology platforms have created companies like Uber and Lyft, which can allow you to be a driver, a taxi driver anytime you want, any time of day on your own schedule. Or professionals are able to offer their artistic services or their engineering services or their computer services online through companies like Upwork. So while there's always been part-time work and there's always been part-time workers, the changes that the internet and technology have made significant opportunities available to more people. At the same time, we see that automation is changing the way we work, both ability to work at home, but it's also eliminating a lot of jobs. So there are, in many ways, however, to be optimistic, it's never been easier to be your own boss. But often our policies, our government leaders at the federal, state, and local level have struggled to keep up and adapt. Labor laws don't always perfectly apply to the environment we find ourselves in with this new gig economy. With that, I'd like to open it up to particularly to San Francisco and Stockton, California, to give us an idea of what are you looking for? How are you approaching the problems and the opportunities of more part-time work in this new growing gig economy?
Thank you so much. It's Todd here. One of the things that cities are set up to do is to help businesses and help workers. We help businesses find, set up, start, grow, stay in our city. We help workers find jobs. We help provide job training, and we provide opportunities and ladders for career development. And so what I think is really interesting about freelancers, independent workers in the gig economy is that this is at the intersection of those efforts. At its core, our city's mission, and I think cities' missions in general, are to help their residents be successful. And in today's economy, at least in San Francisco, we have while the economy is very strong, we have a 3.4% unemployment rate, more jobs than any time in San Francisco's history. There are major challenges that we're facing. We have an incredible affordability crisis of housing, and we have real challenges with employees and workers and residents who are making enough money to be able to stay in our city. And so when we looked at the independent workers and the gig economy, one of the questions we asked ourselves is how do we leverage the gig economy to actually achieve our policy goals? One of the things that we just announced, and part of our answer to that question, is a suite of services that we just released on Friday of last week. It includes two key parts. The first is a toolkit for freelancers, specifically designed for freelancers, on the San Francisco Business Portal. And the portal is a place that we created to provide information. If you're a restaurant, one place you can go to learn everything you would need to know about opening a restaurant in San Francisco. But we didn't have that for a freelancer. We didn't have that for a gig worker. And so we developed that. We partnered with a number of groups, including Sama School. We reached out to platform companies. We talked to gig workers. And we said, well, what is it that you would need to be able to reduce the friction to opening and operating and being a freelance business here in San Francisco? So we put all that content on one page and created something very simple, which is a freelancer's toolkit, which tells you everything that you need to know about registering your business, because you are a business in San Francisco. So everything you need to know about registering your business, paying your taxes. But then we also wanted to be value add. We wanted to provide information about how you actually, you need to provide your own benefits. And so what types of resources are available to help you do that? We need to help you think about your taxes and help you think about ensuring that you're putting away money for reinvesting in your business and marketing yourself. The second aspect of the strategy was to help somebody who's walking in the door of one of our job training centers. We're the Workforce Investment Board for the city and county of San Francisco, and we have residents walking in 7 job centers across the city saying, I'm looking for work or I'm looking for training. And so what our focus was on, how do we leverage gig economy opportunities to help people, particularly those that are going through our job training. And one just very quick example of a potential application that we envision is that if somebody is going through a healthcare academy, it's unpaid training, that they could sign up for a gig through care.com or through some other platform, and so that they could be taking gigs in their profession of training and earn a little bit of money, gain some real-world experience, all while going through our healthcare academy to become a medical assistant. And that could be back to W-2 work, or that could actually go and they could stay as a 1099er. We think either path is fine, but the most important thing for us from the city's perspective is make sure that it's part of a career plan, and that we really want to help residents understand how whether freelance work or W-2 work fits into their broader career strategy and career goals. That ensures that the freelancer is the one who's ultimately in charge of their career path.
Thanks, Todd. Mayor Tubbs.
Yeah, I would just jump in and say everything Todd said, I'm absolutely in agreement with. And I think it's a great timing in terms of the timing of this conversation right after we celebrated Labor Day and some of the gains we've made in labor and workers' protections and rights over the past 100 years. I think to the point in some of the framing comments earlier, we're now at that inflection point again about what does the future of work look like and how do we make sure folks are benefit from the freelance and gig economy, but also have some of the protections that become almost staples in terms of benefits and retirements, et cetera, while understanding they may not look the same as our parents or our grandparents, but there is some sort of safety net and there's some protections there. So what some of the things we're looking at in Stockton are really around, I think the mayor of New York and his freelancers aren't free sort of legislation, looking at what can we do to ensure that we're not impeding on the ability of people to exercise their agency and become freelancers and to participate in the gig economy, but also make sure that they're giving certain, just a baseline level of protections, whether it's a contract or whether it's guarantees that there'll be some sort of payment on time, and things of that sort. And to Todd's point, also offering them kind of trainings and skills. And one of the other things we're really focused on is just this idea of a skills gap and how do we continue to upskill and allow folks in the gig economies and in other sectors that may be displaced by technological advances and automations over the next 10, 20 years, how to at least give those workers the opportunity today to be upskilled and learn skills that may be more transferable to the economy that exists and will continue to exist in the future. So we've been talking really closely, or working really closely, with our school districts, our community college system, and our employers to really look at, okay, what are the skills that folks need for the jobs that exist in 20 years from now, and how do we build them out? Because one of the issues one of the opportunities, in communities like Stockton is that even for simple things like front-end web development, for example, there's not really clear places where folks can go to get those skills. So we're using this opportunity to have that community conversation about, okay, how do we make sure people have the skills? How do we build the systems, the programs, and the partnerships so it's very clear that if someone wants to learn this kind of higher skill for a job that may exist 10 years from now, there's a place for them to go get it. So I'm also not sure if I answered your question, but partly it's because we're very much in exploratory thinking phase because it's a whole new terrain and we're just trying to get a little bit ahead of the 8 ball before it becomes a huge thing we have to begin working on.
Mayor Tubbs, you have obviously put a lot of thought into this. Talking with other mayors around the country, what do you think are the 2 or 3 areas where they're blind about what's coming? Are they not seeing the changes in the workforce yet? Or they're seeing them, but they don't know what to do? Or what do other cities like yours not yet see?
Well, what's interesting, I didn't realize, it's not that it's coming, but it's already here. And I say that because oftentimes every weekend around Friday after about 10 p.m., I get a text from somebody, a colleague, or a snap from somebody, a colleague or a friend who says, hey, my Uber driver's from Stockton. And that happens, and they were in San Francisco or in Oakland and Sacramento. And that happened so frequently, I began looking and asking and figuring out, wow, there's a lot of people already, especially millennials. But even some folks who are older, who are retired or who are maybe laid off, who are now participating in this gig economy. And then some of my other friends work at companies like TaskRabbit, and they were telling me there's some folks from Stockton on it. So I was like, oh, wow, this is something that's already here and happening. I think oftentimes in the discussions we have, it's that it's coming in the future. But no, it's already here, and it's only going to increase in intensity as time goes on. I think also the second thing that may be a blind spot is that there's not that many spaces to have a conversation about what it might mean. Because, of course, as humans, we're afraid of loss. So if the conversation starts with, I'm going to lose this, I'm going to lose this, I'm going to lose this, as a politician or as an elected leader, it's not my inclination to dive deep in that conversation because we want to give and not take. So if there's a way to reframe the conversation in terms of these are the benefits, this is what we can do, this is how can we preserve and minimize losses and actually get gains from this technological advancement, I think that would bring more people in the conversation. But I also think number 3 is just because it's so new, it's so nascent, there's not that much data, research, articles besides what the fact sheet you guys were able to put together that's even out there. So if I want to have the conversation, there's not really the language or necessarily the tools or the skill sets to even have that conversation in a way that's data-driven, data-informed, and kind of speaks to larger economic trends.
Todd, I wonder from your perspective as an administrator, what you see as some blind spots in other cities that haven't come as far as Stockton, San Francisco on this.
Well, one point I want to just build on that I think the mayor was pointing out is that the gig economy really calls the question about how these workers operate in a very regional sense. We as cities, are more of a construct, a more a physical world construct of, these are city boundaries, these are county boundaries, these are the municipalities that govern in a particular way. But I think, as the mayor was pointing out, a Lyft driver who lives in San Francisco and drives Lyft in Stockton, or lives in Stockton and drives Lyft in San Francisco, they don't really know those boundaries. And I think it's challenging policymakers to think more regionally, more broadly, and more comprehensively about what the worker, the freelancer's experience is, but also challenging us to think about what that regulatory framework has to be. And so I think there's new, and I think to the mayor's point, I think there's new structures that need to be created, new types of forums of discussion and dialogue and information sharing and best practice sharing that's really necessary in order for us to rise to this challenge. And again, I think just the broader topic about the future of work, I think this is just, the gig economy is just one of many types of innovations that's going to really necessitate this kind of dialogue.
So cities and counties always compete for jobs, of course, whether it's building that new plant in your town or perhaps with a new version of worker, the gig worker. I wonder if there are competitive advantages that a city or county can create to incent or create more job opportunities for your own people. Mayor Tubbs, Todd.
Please, Mayor. Please, perfect.
Let me make sure I understood the question. So you were saying oftentimes cities and counties compete for employers for taxes, but with the gig economy, are you saying? Well, I missed the second part of the question.
So you see cities and counties and states compete for jobs in the traditional way, which is come build a car plant in my city, and they offer tax incentives and they offer regulatory forbearance. I wonder if there are tools that cities and counties are using or might use to make their city more gig friendly or more independent worker friendly.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting reframe. And I think part of the conversations about incentives goes back to benefits. And if there's a way to prove that there's tangible benefits in terms of what everybody cares about, tax revenue. And I'm sure there is intuitively, but if there's a way to kind of put a number to that, I would think that most cities would be very proactive, and counties and states proactive about how do we incentivize and make gig economy workers work. So if it's a correlation between that and unemployment, increased sales tax revenue, et cetera, discretionary income, but there's a way to quantify and number it, then it's very easy to make a public argument that it's in our best interest to offer incentives or to be kind of the hub for that sort of activity because it benefits our bottom line, which provides broadly for the general welfare of everyone.
What do you think, Todd? Are there ways to make San Francisco even more gig friendly compared to your next competitor in San Jose or Stockton compared to your competitor in Fresno?
Well, I can everyone hear me okay? I've switched on my audio a little bit. One of the things that I think that we've in this mode of regional thinking, and particularly in the Bay Area, where I feel like the idea of the mega region of not just San Francisco, but Stockton and Sacramento, and some may go as far as Fresno, that regions really have to think and work together. And I think the conversations between San Francisco Mayor Edwin M. Lee, as well as Mayor Tubbs and others, is focused on how do regions work better together versus compete with each other. The housing crisis, the innovations that are happening in work that are changing the nature of work and what workers need, income inequality. These aren't city challenges. These aren't county challenges. These are national, state, and regional challenges. And so I think that regionalism is going to be necessary to address this. I think to the question of how do you actually make your location be more attractive to gig workers, I think where we've really focused on it is to help residents who are looking for pathways to good jobs, to help them understand what the gig economy can mean for them. So that's why we partnered as part of our gig strategy with Sama School to help build some pretty straightforward, simple curriculum that's really focused on how to educate someone who knows nothing about the gig economy and give them the primer that really asks the questions and challenges the job seeker. Is this really the right thing for you? And if so, here's the things that you need to know about, and give them that primer. And so it's less about attracting maybe new talent to the gig economy and really focus on helping residents who are here understand what the gig economy can mean for them and make sure that they can maximize those opportunities.
So I'd love to take a related tack on this question. And this is wonderful. Thank you both for sharing your experiences and insights firsthand. I think I look at what it takes to run a city. I have lots of questions. Some are sort of organization and process and who do you actually need to pull around the table. But where my head keeps going right now is also more on the economic development end of things. So we're going to talk more about how to help workers and the worker perspective. But when you look at city budgeting, you look at revenues, you look at the public services that you need to deliver and the need to provide for those. To what degree have you been able to get your heads around or start thinking about ways like the gig economy in particular, but just freelancers as a whole? It's a different way of looking at how, whether it's filing taxes or paying periodic dues or fees to city governments, but from a revenue perspective, because at the end of the day, that really enables you to deliver the best services and become the most amazing city or continue that status. How has it factored into your thinking around economic models and revenues?
I'm happy to take a first stab at that and then hand it off to you, Mayor Tubbs. We haven't really looked at the as much of the totality of the economic impact of gig workers. I think where we've really looked at, we have our tax system is set up in such a way where we really focus on incentivizing small businesses, of which all freelancers qualify as being independent contractors. We don't charge, they have to file a small business registration fee, but there's generally no taxes that are assessed to those businesses. So I don't think that there's really it's as much a focus around taxation as the core benefit to the city. I think it really is helping residents earn an income stream through a mode which is not, a W-2 job. I think that having that supplemental income or, providing a source of revenue for a household is powerful when a city is thinking about, well, how do we ensure that residents are able to go through this unpaid training, or how can we supplement income outside of traditional social services? I think that really is the impact.
Great.
I absolutely agree. I think, and that's kind of what I alluded to in my last answer, is that we probably haven't done enough thinking around sort of how do we quantify the tax benefits to the city. Because there has to be some, because people have more discretionary income, so they're buying more, so it's taking the time to gather that. So thank you for the question. I wrote it down as something for me to discuss as I continue on my job.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's partly also to just sort of tease out where we are in our respective learning journeys, but also what we all might learn from one another here around the table, around the figurative table, the digital table today, and then our respective tables in our organizations and cities and homes as well. And this leads me to wonder too, if I may, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just thinking, Melissa, from where you sit and the ways in which you've been doing outreach with cities. Part of it is education and awareness building around the self-employed. Based on what you've heard, I'm just thinking about this from the perspective of building awareness and potentially there are partnerships and that sort of thing, but much more at the ground level of, from what you know about tax and financial planning, any ideas that you'd like to share?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and I just want to echo what both the mayor and Todd have been saying. I think what we have seen is educating on what it means to be an on-demand, to be in this new on-demand economy that I mentioned is only growing, and we anticipate growing. We did a survey earlier this year with 8 of our platform partners, and about 6,400 respondents, responded that, hey, 24% of them actually want to use this gig economy, the on-demand work, in order to supplement their income. A lot of them are looking at it from a freelance perspective in terms of, I want to learn new skills. I want to become better at my job. I want to do the best work of my life, that type of thing. And a number of them are actually motivated by the opportunity to work on projects that they're passionate about. And so it's showing them what's possible for them and also helping them understand what it means to be that segment of the economy that we said is growing, right? So I think that the mayor talked about, the skills, the tax benefits, the tax requirements and things like that, all stuff that when you're in the on-demand economy workforce, you're not really thinking about, right? You're thinking about doing the work of your life. You're thinking about being motivated about what you're passionate about. You're not thinking about all that other stuff. But as Todd referred to, you're often scared about what that means to get rid of that normal paycheck that you get in order to go into that. And so the more I think that there can be public-private partnerships, such as companies and cities and governments working together in order to educate that workforce and help them feel more comfortable to move towards that innovation. I think that the more successful that segment of the economy can be.
Let me close out this section, April, and ask Todd and Mayor Tubbs in particular, what do you need from the private sector or from non-governmental organizations or think tanks that you don't have already to better adapt your cities? You've mentioned more data, more research. We took that notes down. What else might you want from the private sector or NGOs?
Well, I think part of what you're doing is super helpful, but also I think we have to have this conversation with our friends in labor. Because I think oftentimes when there's any massive change at scale, rightfully so, people are worried. What does this mean? What happens? How do we adapt? And I think the sooner we get everyone on the same page and understanding that technology is going to happen, whether we want to or not, and it's not something that's something to fear, but we do need our best thinking from everyone. From workers, from unions, from elected officials, from the private sector to really think through how do we preserve the best parts of our current economic arrangement, namely a safety net, healthcare, benefits, et cetera, while still understanding that it may look different or it may play out differently. It may have to be portable, may not be tied to a place, but to a person, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that would be incredibly helpful. And also setting up a couple demonstration sites, whether it's with a locality in specificity or whether it's with an industry. So there's a proof of concept. Because my biggest fear is I hate being behind. And I think we're already behind on this issue, but I would really hate if 20 years from now, we're still in the very beginning stages of a conversation and the 1,000, 50, 100,000 people, or whatever the number is, who drive trucks are now seemingly displaced. Or the folks who drive Uber and Lyft are now displaced because most cars are automated. And so the sooner we have the conversations, the sooner we have the data. And also an understanding, just given the way things work, it's the cities deal with it because the people live in cities. But I would argue that the feds and the state governments actually will have a bigger role, especially if we think about taxation, as most of our taxes go to the state and the federal government anyway. So having them talk and be thinking about this early will kind of help us at the local level prepare our residents and in our cities for what's coming, but also what's already here.
I think I think the mayor is dead on that. One of the big questions that I think we face, and the area where we can really benefit from the engagement of platforms, is around how do we, is the question around benefits, but also around how do we help ensure that gig workers have all the right information to be successful. And I know that there's obviously safe harbor issues. I know that there's issues around how much can companies engage without taking on obligations to their 1099ers? But I think that question needs to be answered so that we ensure that the freelancers and the gig workers are ultimately able to be not just successful running their business, but also so the platforms can continue to have successful participants on their platform. And so I really think there's a win-win, and that there has to be something that breaks that logjam. And I know there's a number of efforts and initiatives that are underway to address that. I think that industry coming together, as the mayor said, ideally with labor, with folks in the foundation, philanthropic community, and others, to help bring that solution to government is a much more preferable way than government deciding to regulate it. So I think that's the first point. The second point, I think, is really around, and again, the mayor, I think, hit it right on its head, the future of work is obviously a lot of unknowns, and impacts of automation and what time frame, absolutely. But to what extent are we able to prepare our cities for this magnitude of change? I know that just from my office runs a workforce development training system. Are we training jobs that won't exist in the future? Probably. So what do we do about that? And what do we train people for that will be provide the types of wages that allow people to stay in expensive cities like San Francisco? Those are big questions. We don't have the answer, but we really would love the engagement of industry to help begin to address them.
A crystal ball.
Yeah. And I think this might be a perfect time actually to segue. There's a lot of what we've been talking about here, and even just picking up on your last point, Todd, I think one of my big questions, many of you have heard of this, the concern or the tension between technology that's used to augment human labor and technology that's used to replace human labor. And, so far from what I can tell, a lot of the talk is about augment, and a lot of the action is still around what about technologies that replace, and how do you, this to your point about training for jobs that will no longer exist, or also from a skills perspective, that knowledge that the new normal may be that you need to reinvent yourself, so to speak, professionally every few years as technology plays a greater and greater role in working alongside human talent. So with that, and I'd like to encourage all of us, keep in mind everything that we're hearing, because the last part of this roundtable is where we get to be really creative and take what we've been marinating in and brainstorm some pilots and brainstorm some what ifs and come up with a kind of wish list for what we would like to see, not just in Stockton and San Francisco, but keep in mind, of course, one of the big audiences for a roundtable like this is mayors around the country, many of whom might be earlier in their learning journey, but really trying to figure out, where do I start? What do I do? So we'll circle back to that. At this point, I'd love to shift slightly, because we've already been talking a lot about the issues that affect independent workers and taking these topics from the independent worker perspective. We've been talking about what does it take to start and run a business. We haven't talked so much about worker classification, although we've alluded to it a little bit. And we've also been talking a little bit about stability, security, social safety nets. How do we navigate this transition to a very different way of working, or a much broader menu of options for the workplace, in a way that balances the flexibility and the upsides of independent work with some of the, not downsides, but the challenges, particularly around social safety nets and security and that kind of thing. And I'm also keenly aware of who we have in the room today. And I know that, Trevor, several of these aspects touch what you do in a way, in a much bigger lens, I suppose, when you look at platform cooperatives as a concept. And I'd love to launch this discussion around putting ourselves in the worker perspective from where you sit. And can you tell us a little bit, also I think people watching this roundtable might not all be familiar with what a platform co-op is, but then also how you see it playing a useful role from the worker perspective in terms of running a business, providing for your family, and creating a kind of path towards financial as well as personal success.
Thank you so much. Maybe a way for me to link to the issues that the mayor has brought up and others is I'm on the advisory board of the city of Barcelona, and there basically funds have been given to incubate, to create experimental spaces for startups that are basically using the cooperative model to create digital platforms. So like I said, what would it be like if there's something like an Uber or a Lyft, but it's owned by the workers? So what can cities do? What can mayors do in that context is also to open up space for experimentation because I think the key issues, and some of you have brought this up already, I think are really, and they should be brought up in town halls, like April already said, is this basically bringing people together from all the different constituencies and discussing issues around the sharing economy, such as inequality, but also income inequality, concentration of these businesses, right? So when we look at platforms like Amazon or TaskRabbit or others functioning in the gig economy, they're very, very concentrated, right? So what does this mean in terms of their power that they can exert over workers? And what does this mean in terms of privacy? What does this shift away from employment to independent contract work mean for worker rights? For health insurance and all these issues. What does it mean for workplace democracy? To what extent have people actually a say in what happens on these platforms that they are spending their entire days on? So this has basically emerged, I think, over the last 2 years, a movement internationally from South Africa to Australia, Hong Kong, the United States, Europe, where you have basically businesses emerging that are running platforms that are worker-owned or user and worker-owned, so multi-stakeholder cooperatives, right? So bringing quite traditional formats to the internet. And so what we have been seeing with cities like Berlin or Barcelona, and now also there's interest in New York, to basically support this model. And because what you see is that workers, that you can actually operate a much fairer digital economy. So give you an example. That here in New York, just a few months ago, Up and Go was started. It's a cooperative and it offers cleaning services. So TaskRabbit and similar platforms take about 30% of the revenue from workers. Up and Go takes 5%. The rest goes to the workers. So you see basically as an example that you can run this economy differently in your city. And so this, I think, is just like a starting point maybe to open it up. I just spoke this morning with Uber drivers in South Africa who have sued Uber for their classification status that now want to form a platform cooperative in Cape Town. Last week, I spoke to a woman from Northern California who wants to bring 50 independent bookstores online with a platform cooperative. There are artists in Denmark who just started a platform cooperative. So there are many examples like that.
Fascinating. Let me ask a follow-up question here, because I think it speaks to a few different people around the roundtable. So this is the word that keeps coming to mind is we've all been talking about how do we empower independent workers. This is a different kind of tool for empowering them at a more fundamental level, so to speak. And it's also, if I understand correctly, this is another option on the table. It's not, it can coexist alongside any corporation, it can coexist along any other kind of activity, but providing workers with more options to structure an independent work lifestyle. Is that a fair way to?
That's absolutely correct. I would completely agree with everything you said there. And so I think it's, I don't think this is a way to replace Uber or Lyft. So that's not the realistic goal here. The goal is to show on a smaller scale that you can operate in the same economy and offer dignity to workers. Dignity that when I talk to these Latina immigrant women at Up and Go, they frankly had never experienced with other platforms that they had worked on before, right? So they are their own boss. They make way more money than with other platforms, and they own the business, so they are proud. And it's for them also something that has to do with with growth and realization. They always talk about how they become different people because they are allowed to work on a platform like that. So I don't know, I find that moving, and it's a great joy to work in that space.
Great, and I'd love, we'll circle back to you for sure. I have more questions. I do want to make sure, though, that we spend time kind of taking this perspective of how do we put ourselves in the in independent worker shoes, and the kinds of options that exist already today that we might build upon. And another big one I know for independent workers everywhere is, I'm excited to be independent. It's a new way of living and working that provides me with a lot of flexibility, et cetera, but I'm not really equipped for all the responsibilities that come alongside. And a lot of those relate to financial planning, financial resilience, budgeting, as well as paying taxes, as well as like the list goes on. And Todd, I believe that you guys, that's part of the toolkit that you're coming up with as well. But I'd love to go back to you, Melissa, and hear about when you look at putting yourselves in the independent worker shoes, based on research, based on surveys that you've done, based on your sense of the landscape. What are some of the most effective tools that you've seen? What are the things that, if you're, again, from an independent worker perspective, the things that you've heard are most in demand or would be most helpful as we look at this intersection of independent work and policy?
So I think in the sense of tools, technology tools that are out there that make this easy for them, I think like the on-demand workers, just like the small businesses, they don't want to have to take the time to think about all the stuff they're required to do on the back end. They want to actually run the business or do the job that they're passionate about. And so any tools that are out there that can help them get that job done without having to think about what they have to do in terms of tracking their expenses or filing their taxes or things like that are very valuable to them. And the more that there are tools out there like that, I think the more this that will help this segment of the economy as well.
Mm-hmm. And so that speaks to me, that I look at that immediately as just a wonderful opportunity and some low-hanging fruit for public-private partnerships as well, where it's not about the city recreating the wheel to develop all of these as part of its own in-house initiatives, and not looking at this. Obviously, there are opportunities for partnerships with the worker platforms themselves, but also with third parties, in terms of they may not be employing the people, but there are lots of solutions providers that have been chipping away at this space, so to speak. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. The technology and innovation that's out there to help this new segment of the economy is only growing. And Intuit has our own product that we have out there called QuickBooks Self-Employed, but there are a plethora of other out there that help the on-demand economy in order to do what we're talking about, tracking expenses, file their taxes, and things like that. The more that there can be that public-private partnerships, the technology companies and innovation, let them continue to innovate so that the government can worry about the questions of labor and things like that we've been talking about, and rely on the tech companies to help this economy grow.
So if I may, this is actually it's sort of a common question for both you and Trevor. When you look at where you sit, and we've been talking on the one hand about platform cooperatives and on the other about tech solutions that already exist, and this is really a matter of connecting the dots. What's the weakest link in the chain? And what I mean by that is, where are levels of awareness and knowledge lowest, such that you don't know what you don't know, and therefore we simply haven't been able to get everybody around the table. And I look at platform cooperatives. Trevor, is it more that workers aren't aware of it, cities aren't aware of it, or that they're aware of it but somehow hesitant to engage? And Melissa, so same question, but from two different, focused on two different touch points here.
International perspective, or like an international practice in that regard. So the Labour Party in the United Kingdom made platform cooperativism part of their digital manifesto. So basically, once they gain power, we will see much more of that. So what is a big obstacle? But I mean, frankly, all we see right now is that people are actually moving into this space. There's a lot of enthusiasm. Maybe in terms of unsolved issues, it's really more technical, actually. And I think an unsolved technical issue is that of governance, right? So for us, platform co-ops are really about democracy, democratic governance, and ownership. Right. So this is decisively not worker-centric, actually. So I wanted to emphasize that, right? So this is not a worker issue, but it's actually also an issue for all internet users, right? So we see in many, many examples, it's not only about the workers, but these are multi-stakeholder cooperatives with unions, with cooperatives, with non-for-profits, with cities going in as partners. So it's not only worker-centric, but the question of governance becomes important, and there isn't really a technical solution that is good enough now to really allow large numbers of distributed workers to make decisions over a platform together, right? So every morning when we get up and we have a cup of coffee or something, and we check into the platforms that we are using, we will find that those are actually all just 4 or 5 platforms, right? And how is it that we are using these platforms without having any meaningful control over them? So how could there be governance of the users and the employees over those platforms?
Okay, but it sounds like in any case, city support for this concept. You haven't run into challenges. I mean, cities, once they learn about it, they're fairly receptive to this. And
I mean, so an issue is what we encountered in Spain is that some city officials are scared. So they are scared of the money of Uber or Airbnb, right? They are scared of when they talk to us that they wouldn't talk to them anymore. So we have encountered. So in Valencia, for example, in Spain or in other cities, that's a definite issue. Yeah.
Okay, and I want to circle back and hear what the mayors and the cities have to say about this. But first, Melissa, I'd love to hear from your perspective about weakest link in the chain, so to speak.
Well, I think it's exactly what's been said previously. I mean, in addition to the piece of the governance angle, right? I think there's the piece of the self-employed worker themselves and their lack of knowledge of what they need to do in this new space, right? And whether it's a tax compliance piece or how they track their expenses in terms of, is it a business expense or another expense? I think all of that are the challenges that face this segment.
Mm-hmm. So it's we're still in kind of a chicken and egg situation. So Todd or Mayor Tubbs, I'd love to hear when you hear the term platform cooperative, if that's something that you've been looking at from a city perspective as a new tool for business development and worker engagement, as well as your thoughts on public-private partnerships, third-party partnerships around in ways that help meet the needs of independent workers, but aren't necessarily the platforms that are the ones that are demanding the labor, but really part of that broader ecosystem. Any thoughts?
I was trying to figure out how to unmute. So actually, I wrote down notes on the platform called cooperative because I don't do the day-to-day kind of implementation. So I need to check with our economic development team and see if that's one of the tools we have in our toolkit for assisting I-9 workers and gig economy workers. In terms of public-private partnerships, I absolutely, especially in a city like Stockton that doesn't necessarily have most of the resources some other cities have, that a lot of the work we have to do to meet some of the service demands of our residents requires robust partnerships with people in the private sector, especially people who are actually experts in the day-to-day. I think oftentimes in cities, we get a lot of things across our desks that we have to respond to, but we're not the experts. It's not the only thing we think about. It's not what we're immersed in. It's one of hundreds and hundreds of other things we're thinking about in terms of how do you make a community prosper. So I should have to say that for us to be really effective in thinking through governance and support, et cetera, incentives for the gig economy, the new economy, it's going to require public-private partnerships because we don't have the expertise, and I don't see the expertise being developed, at least in the short term.
Thank you. Todd.
So, one of the things that we did with the business portal and the freelancer page that we created, we pulled other people's content. To say it directly, we kind of just stole other people's content. And that's really how we designed our business portal. We wanted to take what other people already knew. We're not the experts at it. And we wanted to bring their content into this handy resource that puts it all in one page and then send people over to them. And so an example of that is we partnered with Earn, which helps people save money and teaches financial literacy to residents. And so we're not the experts at that. Earn's the expert at that. And so we just built them into our portal page under a section of like how to manage your freelance work. And it's just really tips and other, it's pretty simple. It's just like tips and resources. And we really designed this as sort of an open source platform. And, others have suggestions about, and for anyone who's watching on the, through the live stream or on the YouTube, please send us other things that you think might be a good fit for this portal. That said, we're also, and Mayor Lee firmly believes in cities helping other cities. We're absolutely going to make this toolkit that we develop open source to any other city. And again, to the competitiveness question from earlier, we really see this as cities in this together. And so we're going to share the content that we generate because, again, it's pretty straightforward, but it's also something that we want to help other cities be able to leverage this. And if we've learned certain things, we want to share those learnings, but also learn from other cities.
Mm-hmm. And that is actually probably there. I have 10 times as many questions when we started this section as when we're ending it. But sorry, I meant that the other way. I have 10 times as many questions now as I did when we started. But I think actually that is, again, a perfect segue to take us into a sort of generative brainstorming session around prototypes. Thinking about, okay, so what is needed? So we've been hearing about, obviously, what San Francisco is up to. Mayor Tubbs, we've heard your views on how you see the world. We've learned about platform co-ops. We've learned about various aspects of financial planning, some of the more practical aspects of building a business by an independent worker. What you just described, so I think what we want to do now is just start throwing some ideas on the wall and do a little bit of, again, creative brainstorming. There's no right or wrong answer. We've all acknowledged that we're in kind of Wild West, uncharted territory, but to think about what, and really here, I think, to take the lens of cities and mayors and what we can do. I mean, I will say too, Mayor Tubbs and Todd, you guys in my conversations, you guys are among the relatively, not the lucky few, but I would say more exceptional than the rule, which is the rule for most mayors is we don't know where to start. This is coming at us, and what do we do? So I hear that you're creating a toolkit that you'll open source. Fabulous. Maybe we take that and start riffing on that as one type of prototype. Maybe we start thinking about in terms of, I gather that awareness of what's out there is actually still a pretty big bottleneck, that there are tools available, but we haven't been able to educate or socialize or disseminate that information widely enough to help workers. I don't have a particular place we have to start in this conversation, but would love to think about, Todd, what you've just said makes me wonder if maybe riffing on your toolkit idea would be certainly one kind of prototype. But then also, Donnie, I'm thinking about you and where you sit at T4A and the network of cities. I think there's another piece around prototyping what's needed to actually build that connective tissue between cities, which exists today, but from what I gather, it's fairly ad hoc. And so maybe there's another kind of prototype, so to speak, from a networking and awareness perspective. Those are just two ideas, but I want to open the floor to everyone to see where has most resonance.
Let me offer this from Tech for America's perspective. We are building a formal partnership with the National League of Cities and with the 2018 U.S. Conference of Mayors President, Steve Benjamin, who is the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina. One of the two major issue areas we want to cover is the changing economy, particularly what happens with the future of work and workers around wages, which are suffering even in a high employment economy, continue to be relatively flat, and also benefits, the things that you all have mentioned here before, retirement, healthcare, unemployment. So we will create with the National League of Cities more opportunities for these forums. What do we know now? We know two things. One, that there are a very, very, very few small number of pilots that are happening today, and that is a tremendous need. For example, one pilot is being run in Oakland, California, around the idea of creating a universal basic income. But it's a very, very small pilot led by a tech incubator called Y Combinator. The idea for the second idea to think about is not only what are the immediate fixes we can make. For example, how do you make healthcare portable as you move from job to job to job? Can you keep your healthcare with you? But are there long-term implications that we can guess about? We think there's a lot of ideas about what to do today. We haven't seen as much study and research about what those impacts might be in 5 or 10 years. And so we are going to put some resources toward that medium and longer term view of immediate concerns today. Finally, I would say this. Tech for America, we think that the answer is broader than simply providing workers more benefits. There is an opportunity here for workers to supplement their income or have bridges between full-time employment. If you listen to the gig economy companies like Upwork or Lyft, they say that the overwhelming majority, 3/4 of their workers, are selling their services online or are driving cars as a way to add to their income. It is not their primary job. So that's a way to think about part-time work or gig work, not just about keeping people's benefits in their hands, but also simply helping relieve pressure on wage stagnation. So there's a lot of things to look at, both short-term and long-term. There are things to look at beyond simply whether workers can keep their benefits as they do part-time and gig work. But right now, there are not enough pilots, as we've mentioned here, and there's not enough long-term modeling or long-term prospective looks at what these policies and the changing economy might mean.
Thanks, Donnie. And I'm curious, following up briefly on that, particularly looking at pilots and thinking about conversations that you've had with mayors across the country, what seemed to you to be the lowest hanging fruit themes for pilots? You mentioned universal basic income. Is that the best one? Or I'm also thinking too, there's this whole category of supplemental income workers. You mentioned it, Melissa mentioned it. I mean, supplemental income and the needs of somebody who's doing this, it just, in a way, when it's supplemental income, it's a priority, but it's, competing with other priorities from an income perspective. So it's just lower on the radar screen. Does that necessitate a change in how we look at the policy ramifications of that particular kind of worker? I don't know. But my question for you is, are there pilots, again, I can say in a conversation like today, I can say, if you had a magic wand or a crystal ball, what are the pilots that you see having the most potential?
It's interesting that if you ask public officials what pilots they would pick first, you get a different answer from the federal government, members of Congress, that you get from mayors, and that you get from economic development directors. So the short answer is we're not sure, but what we've heard, particularly from state and local folks, is they'd like some regulatory forbearance from the federal government. For example, how do you define a worker under the IRS code? And the question in this environment where Washington doesn't produce a whole lot these days, no matter who the president is, getting that regulatory forbearance legislatively could be very difficult. So I don't have all the answers, April. I am curious to hear what kind of pilots everybody else on this call thinks would be priorities.
Super. Trevor, I think you might have some ideas.
I'm running this consortium of some for the organization, all sort of trying to push this cooperative platform economy. And one thing that we have been focusing on is a very ambitious project, like a very large-scale project, that is an online learning environment that basically informs people. It's like an online town hall about the sharing economy and about the digital economy, out of which you then also are led to a toolkit that we will design that includes an open source labor platform so that you can actually design your own labor platform for your business. That includes some of the other tools we heard about here, so the portable benefits, and it also includes governance tools and also social networking, so that people in a city that are interested in doing something like that, and we hear from them almost daily, right? That they can find the other people, right, in their cities, be that in Minnesota or Idaho or Los Angeles. So this online learning environment, basically where you can create learning groups in different cities all over the world that can then lead to the formation of small cooperatives that move their business online or move their existing business online.
Interesting. And you're saying this I apologize, I think you mentioned it and I didn't catch it. It already exists to some degree, but you have plans for greater growth. Where is there a place that people can find? What is this called right now?
This exists already. Well, right now it's just on the table of a lot of foundations. No, this doesn't exist yet. But it will grow out of platform.coop. You see on our website, we have a directory of all the different platform co-ops that exist. We want to change that drastically and make it much more accessible, so that people can basically say, I'm in San Francisco, where are the other people, and what kind of platform co-ops are in my city? How can I connect with them? How can I incubate and start one of this sort of alternative ethical business?
Okay, fabulous. And I think for those who are watching this roundtable, on the reInvent site for this particular roundtable, there will be additional information around resources and that sort of thing. So I suspect that we'll be following up with you guys for links to, in this particular case, more information on platform co-ops, and Todd, for example, your program and so forth. And Todd, I believe that you have some thoughts as well.
Well, I don't have a pilot idea, but I do have a challenge, and I'd be remiss if I didn't pass up this opportunity with academia and private industry here represented to issue sort of a question, I think, from a policy perspective of the challenge that I struggle with, and wonder if you panel has any thoughts on. And one thing that I've heard, and I don't know if you all disagree with this, is that the knowledge economy basically has shown that people who have certain levels of education have higher earning potential, and those who have not completed high school and a 4-year degree, their income potential caps out at a certain level, and that's driving the income inequality challenge that we're seeing in San Francisco. And one thing that I've heard, and tell me if you disagree, is that there's a real risk that the platform economy will just simply emulate, that people that are on high skilled platforms will continue to do fine, and people that are on less skilled platforms will not. And then once you layer on automation and other trends that are happening, that we actually just get more, if not worse, income inequality. And so I guess one challenge that I'd want to ask, or question and challenge I want to ask everybody on the panel is, what do we, if that is partially true, what do we do about that to prevent that outcome? And how can the platform economy really help to shift and be an agent for income equalization and advancement for those, particularly who are those that are being left behind in the current economy?
Yeah, no, Todd, thank you for bringing that up. And I want to open it up to the group in just a minute. I will simply reflect and sort of reiterate that I share the same concerns that you have, and that a lot of times when we look at, the people, the flexibility and the upside to earn more income, for example, amongst skilled workers is significant. But the bifurcation between skilled and unskilled often match to levels of education, not necessarily, but the the future of work from an independent worker perspective, from a skilled perspective, looks pretty good. From an unskilled perspective, it looks pretty dire. And I say that candidly because in my conversations and my work around the world, I haven't met any policymaker who's come up with, a viable, certainly not a solution, but even, some thread to sort of carry them forward on that narrative. So, and I think once we add the layer of automation, then things become, potentially significantly more difficult to course correct. So that is not an answer by any means. That is more of a, I'm with you. So let's dive into this. Who in the group would like to tackle this? I think Trevor. I think also I'm just wondering, Melissa, in some of the research that I know Intuit has done around why the motivations of workers and skill levels of workers, whether you might have any insights into Todd's challenge. Let's start with Trevor briefly, and then over to others.
Okay. Well, this is actually one of my research foci is the relationship between inequality and technology. And so from statistics, you find that about a third of American freelancers are very happy, right? So it's a clear improvement, just as April said, they're very skilled. You find the same in Germany, right? So where I'm from originally, where basically people who are very high skill set are doing much better than they would otherwise. However, in the United States, for 3/4 of the freelance population, they would much rather be employed, right? This is Bureau of Labor Statistics. So you see basically that, and many in my academic cohort basically would agree that that technology is in fact promoting the shift away from direct employment and thereby a removal from labor rights, etc. Worker rights, and so there are many disadvantages. And as a counterforce, right, is much of what I had described right now, like these sort of cooperative platforms. There are, of course, many other movements that also work on that. So I don't want to suggest a single solution here, but this is our model is one of many other models.
Melissa, any thoughts here? Or I open it up to everybody. I want to let everyone chime in.
This is Donnie. I want to throw something out there related to this. There's a lot of different statistics going around about how big the part-time economy, and more specifically the gig economy, actually is. And I wonder where we're going in terms of the number of employees and the number of workers, especially in the United States. Is this? It's obviously important enough for a lot of people to talk about it. But is it how much of a dominant factor in the changing economy is gig work or independent work going to be? Is it a exponentially growing sector, or is it just moderate growth? Maybe we don't have the answer.
I have some ideas, but I want to make sure, I want to open up to others. And I don't know, does anyone want to chime in? Because it really, this is a very, let me add this very brief comment. So from the statistics that I've read, and I think the ones that are most commonly accepted, 34% of the US workforce today, 40% estimated by 2020, 50% estimated by 2030. So within less than a generation, we have majority self-employed. Now, granted, some of those might have multiple sources of income and so on and so forth, but as one kind of identity, it is self-employed. That's massive. I was going to say, I've often said I would love to see, technically, if the self-employed were mobilized, they could single-handedly determine the outcome of the next presidential election. Before that, actually, since we're focusing on cities today, I'm wondering, and I guess this is more of a challenge as opposed to a pilot idea, but I'm really excited for the day when, as part of a mayor's campaign, they actually call out that the electorate they most want to attract to the table are self-employed. Something along those lines. That's not, it's less about substantive content, but it's more about acknowledging not only that this future of work is taking place, already is underway, but that it's top priority for the future health and talent and well-being and economic development of a city. So I'll just throw that out there. But Mayor Tubbs, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to say, I think a lot of language uses around entrepreneurship and building entrepreneurial ecosystems, supporting entrepreneurs. So it may not have the exact verbiage, but I think most local elected city leaders are thinking about how to best support self-employed entrepreneurs, but maybe making sure that people in the gig economy are also part of that discussion for sure, that they're seen as entrepreneurs as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about something quite, I don't want to say simple. I mean, it has to be pulled together. But one of the things that we've heard from self-employed, and again, I say broadly, this is a global phenomenon, that there's a lack of identity in terms of, some call themselves freelancers, some call themselves entrepreneurs, I'm my own boss. Other people just don't think, it's just what I do. It's not, I don't think of myself necessarily as first and foremost self-employed. I think of myself as a business owner. I think of myself as an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. And as a result, a lot of the people working in this space don't know each other, don't self-identify, and therefore, aren't necessarily mobilized. And that plays out when we're talking about worker rights. That plays out when we're talking about things like potentially establishing a cooperative and whatever the case may be. And one of the lower hanging fruits that I've heard various places talk about is the need to have a common shared space to gather, a place for gig economy workers to connect, convene, talk, share, mobilize, and so forth. I know we live in a digital virtual world a lot of the time, but there's nothing that can replace physical connection in a physical space. And that's one of those things too that a city of any size could think about creating, so to speak. Does that resonate with you guys? Is that something that's worth putting out there, or yeah?
I think that I think the mayor had a really good analogy that we talk, elected officials, cities talk about entrepreneurship and small businesses in particular as part of every campaign, and how much cities rely on small businesses as the driver and the heart of their economy. While technically freelancers and gig workers are a subset of small businesses, I think the idea of calling out that segment of the business population and working population is not far off, April, to your question. I think, though, the missing link, and you hit the nail on the head, is how well is this community organized? If the mayor or if we wanted to convene a roundtable of freelance workers, there's certain sources we could go to, but more than likely we're going to go to the platforms. And so, and that's fine. But is there just like a freelancers union, is there some other place where gig workers and freelancers can caucus so that policymakers can go and reach out directly to them and say, easily, how well do you need? And then also to ensure that they are showing up when legislation in Washington or in Sacramento, here in California, or in our city halls that affects them, their voices are being heard. I think that I really haven't seen that level of engagement.
Mm-hmm. Melissa, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I simply am curious. From a self-employed perspective, Intuit has access to a whole lot of self-employed of all walks of life in all kinds of business. And you do a lot of really helpful research and surveys and trying to better understand their needs and motivations. Hearing this now, how does a company like Intuit look at self-employed worker mobilization? The most effective ways for that to happen, or what needs to, what do you hear from the self-employed workers that are part of your community?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, going back to what Todd just said, I mean, Intuit has something called Follow Me Homes, right? Where we're literally follow home our customers to their place of business or in their current job to ask them what it is, what are their challenges, either about our products themselves or just in general, and how can we help them. And so one of the things, just touching back to the overarching question of what's one of the things we can all do is I think we can all take a page from that book and start talking more from a perspective to these self-employed to say, hey, what are your top needs? I think it's very easy for companies or think tanks or policymakers to think this is the solution for this segment of the economy without first hearing from them as to what it is their challenges are to be self-employed. And so that's one of the things I would encourage all policymakers, something we talk about at the federal level, state and local, and global even. I think in terms of organizing self-employed, I think it all comes down to, as Todd was referring to, you're always going to go back to the platforms or the technology companies that can touch them the most, right? And I don't really see as many organizations popping up that have just the self-employed as their as the speakers. And so maybe that's an issue down the road or a call to action for the self-employed, to start speaking up, or to make sure that their platforms that they work on or the technology companies that they work with can participate into this discussion.
Mm-hmm. And I think it kind of, what we're talking about now, it kind of does beg the bigger question too of, is there a 21st century labor union, or the big labor unions today, many of whom and this is globally as well, trying to adapt, but when they've been a labor union that's been based on the employment model full stop, very hard to transition. And so we do have the freelancers union, but that sense of, are we likely to see more of the freelancer union kind of organizations build, or are we going, what will the new labor union, if we go out 10 or 20 years, what will that look like? I don't think any of us have that question, but for me, that's the stakeholder that's in the middle of all of this that we're not really talking about. We weren't able to get on the roundtable today, but I guess that'll be for a future installment. Todd, did you want to say something?
If I may, actually, I just had a quick kind of research question, because I think in terms of me, it's when we say gig economy worker, or so, like who are these people in terms of what's their average age, what's their average income, what's their average education? Because I think that's helpful for me as a policymaker to begin to really think very targeted around sort of what a solution looks like. Because right now and maybe it is just a broad, I'm sure there's some characteristics of this group that make them different from other groups of workers that I represent in the city, but I don't yet have the data as to sort of what's their education level, what's their ethnicity, what's their income, because that would allow me to think strategically about who are some of the other partners and folks I need to bring as part of the conversation who may be able to fill in some of the gaps based on kind of what's needed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to me it does. I think too, there's some researchers that work with companies like Intuit that get tasked with doing that kind of surveying. There's also, I wonder, connections for you within government, with small business association, with education association, different departments that I wonder too. I'm generally not a huge fan of working groups and committees and task forces and that sort of thing. But in this case, when it comes to things like research and doing some of those assessments, I wonder if there's a sort of workforce that cities increasingly will be pulling together around some of the emerging future of work trends.
Yeah, and April, I just want to, just echo again what the mayor has been saying, though, I think is an important point, which is how you define this. Everybody thinks about self-employed as the Uber drivers or the Lyft drivers, and it's so much more than just that, right? And how you define this new economy is so important, and goes back to educating, right? And as you're talking to people, whether it's the on-demand economy themselves, or whether it's policymakers, or even companies trying to help with the public-private partnerships, right? How you define who is in that segment is so critical.
And I now have another question, but I know that we're coming up on time, so I'm going to respect everyone's time. My question, which I'll just park for a later conversation, is: are there, do we want to look is it appropriate to look at the future of work, the future of independent work, from the perspective of different subsets of workers, or does that become too scattered too quickly, and that we really need to focus on kind of the broader terminology and educating around that a smaller set of terms. I don't know. But at this point, we are heading towards the end of our 90 minutes together. And I think first and foremost, I want to thank you guys for engaging in this conversation and creative brainstorming and sharing your points of view and your expertise. I think we're going to keep our wrap up relatively brief, but do want to give everyone an opportunity. And I guess I'm going to give you an option. There are two things. You're welcome to answer one or both of either one or both of these questions. But as we think about what you've heard and heading back into your role after this call wraps, what is one thing that really struck you about this conversation, surprised you in a helpful or not so helpful way? And secondly, is there any one thing that you learned or thought about on this call that you want to know or try or go learn more about tomorrow? So that's kind of where we're going to land things. And I will take volunteers, or I will call on somebody. Does anyone want to volunteer?
I'm happy to go first, April.
All right, Todd.
Well, I thought Trevor's points about the co-ops were fascinating. And Trevor, I'd love to connect offline and learn a little bit more about that. And to the extent that it's a model that we replicated, certainly anything that helps empower workers to increase their own equity in their own organization, that's a wonderful thing. I think the question that I'm left needing to learn more about, it does go back to the question of how is the skilled and unskilled divide, and how do we ensure that the platform economy is a really positive. I think all of us are on this call because we believe the platform economy and gig work can be a force of good. And I guess the question that I continue to have is, how do we make that real? And how do we ensure that the inequality questions that is, the gig economy didn't invent inequality, but the questions that we as policymakers are facing every day, how do we make sure that this industry is not something that gets caught up in a broader discussion around, this is part of the problem and actually part of the solution. So that's my ongoing big picture question.
Super, thank you. Mayor Tubbs.
Yeah, well, I have a bunch of questions and follow-ups. Definitely interested in exploring this idea of a freelance co-op, especially because I think a lot of the criticism and some of the angst around kind of the new gig economy is that people fear a deterioration of workers' rights and ownership. So those models I think will be super helpful. I'm also very, very interested in sort of developing a research agenda around when we speak about the gig economy, folks who live in Stockton who are part of this greater Bay Area region. Who exactly are we talking about, and what do we know about them, and who are they in a real data informed way? Because I think that would help us be better served and serving and making sure they're part of the conversations. And also just for me personally, as I talk about entrepreneurs and things of that sort, I'm thinking about folks who may be independent contractors, because oftentimes they're not necessarily always focal and center when I speak of entrepreneurs and small business owners. And I realize that as they become more and more part of our economy, they have to become so. And then I'm also just really interested in, again, just continuing and doubling down on the work for the folks in our community who are in service level jobs that will likely be automated and displaced in the next 10, 15 years. What can I be doing today to build the partnership so folks who want to be retrained and reskilled, to your point earlier about having to retrain and reskill every 2 or 3 years, that we build those systems now. So 10 years from now, folks don't feel like the world just collapsed on them, but they've been prepared and had time to really think through sort of what skills do they want to bring to bear in this new economy. So yeah, more questions and answers, but excited to be doing the work.
Fabulous. Thank you. Melissa or Trevor, either one? Anyone want to? Melissa, I see you on my screen.
So I think one of my big takeaways was just clarifying what that definition is for the on-demand economy. I think let's try to help, as the mayor said, getting the data about who actually is in this set, I think is key. And I think the other big thing the other takeaway I got is that it's clear that there has to be some education. So whether it's about who is in the set or education for people who want to do this in terms of what it means to be in the on-demand economy and what's required of them. And then last, just questions about public-private partnerships. What other opportunities are there out there that can help this economy move forward and not necessarily have to wait for new regulation or new changes from that point of view? And just thank you for having us.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Melissa. And then I guess Trevor will ask you to bring us home, and then I think Donnie and I have a couple things to say, and we'll wrap up.
I just want to thank you, April, and Peter for inviting us, to Donnie and to Mayor Tubbs and Todd, Melissa. It was really fascinating to hear all your perspectives and sort of to put myself in the shoes of City Hall, of town halls, and think how you think about your constituencies. And I would just want to reach out to you and say, like, if you need our help, we would definitely be there and willing to support you with your efforts. So thank you, everybody.
Super. Donnie, I guess this is where you and I as co-hosts wrap things up.
Yes, April, I want to repeat a few resources for people watching this. One is the reInvent website, reinvent.net. The other is the Tech for America website, which is t4a.org. The third is if you like the idea of platform co-ops, the website is platform.coop, C-O-O-P, or platform.coop, I guess, if you don't know any better. And then there is the website at the San Francisco City Government, the San Francisco Business Portal, that has a lot of details on this growing economy and what the city of San Francisco, the epicenter of technology, is trying to do.
And I think if you Google freelancer starter kit, San Francisco, that it's too long of a site to name here, but you'll find it right there. And it's open source and I guess showing up in cities elsewhere soon. And on that note as well, thank you, Donnie. It's been a real pleasure to host this today, to co-host this. And I will also make reference some of the themes that we talked about, and I'll call out in particular the one about lifelong learning. How do we retool every couple of years? How do we stay relevant? That actually will be the topic of a future roundtable that's part of this reInvent series. So reason to come back and check out what else is happening in this series on the future of work with a focus on independent workers. And we'll simply, I think, wrap there, giving our thanks first and foremost to all of the roundtable participants for your time and your expertise. And then I think also to reInvent, obviously. Donnie, thank you for tag teaming on this. And all of this will be available online shortly thereafter with some little bit of editing. But please, once that goes live, share the link out with friends, colleagues, anyone you think that would benefit from this conversation. And with that, have a wonderful rest of the day, all, and thank you again.
Thank you.